Hey everyone, I've been asked a lot recently to explain the difference between the emergency remote teaching people have been doing all around the world in the last few months because of the virus and the online distance learning that I've been doing the last 20 years or so and have been studying quite a bit. So I wanted to take a couple minutes and just go over some of the misconceptions or the differences that between those two things from a teacher's point of view. So the first thing I wanted to point out is that just in the same way that anyone can put out a fire, if this fire is small enough and you happen to have water, there's a big difference between putting out a fire in an emergency by yourself and being a professional fighter. The professionals have better tools. They know how to use their tools. They know how to work as teams effectively for this, and they know how to prevent fires in the first place. So the difference between just throwing water on something that's burning and being a professional firefighter is sort of like the difference between emergency remote teaching and real professional online learning. For example, they're different in the key questions they ask. For emergency remote teaching, you focus on questions like, how can I teach my lessons online? With the ODL, the question becomes, how can students master the objectives online? You're not thinking in terms of your class that you taught yesterday and now it's online. You're thinking in terms of how to help students in a new format completely. Instead of asking, how can I make the best use of class time and homework time? You ask, how can students master the objectives as quickly as possible? Instead of saying, how can I make videos? How can I get the textbooks to students? You say, how can students access the best materials, including videos made by other people, or online textbooks, or things that they create themselves? Instead of asking, how can I connect with all of my students? You ask, what are the interactions that will help students the best? Will they learn better from talking with each other about this in a small online discussion? Would they learn better through emailing each other or through a forum or through Hangouts? And it's not about them connecting with you, it's about them learning the material and connecting however necessary to learn. Instead of focusing in emergency remote teaching, you have the same curriculum you always had, and now you just have to do it online. With online distance learning, you focus on the question of, how can we make the curriculum better? What can we really teach? What do students really have to know to succeed with this new technology? And one of my favorites is I heard so often in the online or the emergency remote teaching time where the question, how can I make sure that students don't cheat? Really the question is, for online learning, how can you make better assessments? How can you make assessments that don't let students cheat because it's impossible to cheat on that assessment? So those are the types of differences in key questions that appear when you're talking about um, the emergency teaching everyone's been doing online and really looking at creating an online learning experience. With emergency remote teaching, basically people are trying to replicate their own classes. With online distance learning, you're creating a new learning experience in a new world. And so how can you do that? In addition to the questions issue, there's the tools issue. With emergency remote teaching, the tools everyone went to first were the ones they knew. WhatsApp, Zoom, YouTube, email. Most people I don't think knew Zoom right away, but they figured it out quickly, and so they would you just teach your regular lesson with Zoom turned on. With online distance learning, you're looking at things like using G Suite, using classrooms and Hangouts, Meet, all that, or you're using a learning management system, an LMS like Moodle, Canvas, Blackboard, Schoology, because when you're looking at really teaching online for the long term professionally, you're not just looking for ways that the teacher can talk to the student. You're looking for ways to form a learning community where teachers can talk to each other, teachers can talk to students from other classes, students can talk to each other, and administrators can talk to teachers and students. And you need to have all of that online. So that's one of the key tool differences when you're looking at real online learning. You're making it so it's not just about a teacher and a student talking. You're creating new communities online. And then there's the processes. Um, for most teachers I've talked to with going online in this emergency situation, the questions were about how do I replicate my lessons? So the same lessons, but online. So I had teachers asking me things like, in my lesson um, for teaching Russian, I used to spend 10 minutes each lesson on going over vocab. Should I spend the same amount going over vocab online? Well, it's hard to answer that because it's not really the right question to ask. In ERT, people want the same lessons, they want the same assessments, but online, the same schedule, but online. And you had to do this all as fast as possible. So I'm not saying this to criticize people. It was an emergency. People were responding as quickly as possible. But that's not really how it should be in an online situation. For real online learning, you start the whole process by looking at your objectives. What are the real things students need to master by the end of the course? And then for each objective, you align that objective with the time, tools, and assessments that you can do. Like for each objective, how will you motivate the students? How much repetition or practice do they need? What type of projects can they do? You're asking those questions for each assessment. And then you go to the next step of maximizing the online experience by looking at the things they can do online that they cannot do as well in a classroom environment. For example, asynchronous learning is a key. In a classroom setting, you have 45 minutes or 15 minutes a day, and you have to maximize that time. In an online learning setting, some students may be able to finish it in 15 minutes, and some may need an hour, and you need to help them meet the objectives either way. So you don't have unlimited time, of course, but that time is not the main consideration. And how can you look for ways to maximize collaborative learning, like discussion groups, shared documents, things like that. You look for ways online environments are great for doing research because any little factual question you need answered, people can just type in the question and the internet will provide an answer. So how can you reduce the factual memorization and discussion and maximize the creativity and real research involved in problem solving and publishing online, like instead of just watching YouTube videos once in a while in class, have your students start making videos, have your students start producing things that other people will read through blogs or through their own websites. And finally, with online distance learning, you spend most of your time really with this, or not, maybe not most for a long course, but much of the time in teaching online happens before the class begins. Now, this is not the same. I mean, all of us prepare our courses before they begin, God willing, but there's a difference between looking over the textbook and making a syllabus before the class begins, and actually planning out learning activities for the entire year where one activity leads to the next. And you can do that in an online environment because of the asynchronous nature of the class. So the process is, I would say for the online distance learning situation, it takes us a lot more time designing the course beforehand and a lot less room for just coming in at the last minute and using your skills as a comedian to entertain students for a while. So my final analogy for this little presentation is that the emergency remote teaching that we've been doing is sort of like eating your favorite food from your home country made by foreigners in a foreign country who had never really tasted what the food was supposed to be like. They'll just make you miss the way that you were used to. Like if you grew up in Central Asia and you go to Argentina, and walk into a restaurant and see that they sell plov, but no one in the restaurant has ever been to Central Asia. The plov probably will not be that good compared to what you're used to, and it'll just make you miss home. That's sort of what we had with this emergency teaching experience online. For online distance learning, it's a little different. It'd be sort of like going to a new country and eating their favorite food made by their cooks who are experts in it. And you still may not like it, but at least you know it's something new. And if you go in with an open mind, you might find that you really like something that you couldn't have had at home. So that's my final analogy for this, and hope this presentation helped a little. Um, and I hope that if we have to go online again in the fall, maybe it'll be a better experience the second time around. Thanks.